Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse by GRESB. I'm your host today, Aidan Versfeld. I'm a manager on the member relations team here at GRESB. And today we'll be diving into a topic about data credibility and completeness. We'll discuss what makes data fit for purpose at GRESB and how completeness, consistency, and reliability determine whether data can truly support benchmarking and decision making. Joining me to discuss the topic today is Joost De Smedt, the CEO from nanoGrid. Joost, thank you for joining. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you. And you?
Very well, thanks.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on board. Could you maybe introduce yourself a bit more and explain a bit about what nanoGrid does?
As you said, my name is Joost De Smedt. I'm founder and CEO of nanoGrid. nanoGrid is now for about 15 years in the business. We do monitoring of utilities data, mostly. We are the data layer in the utility landscape, collecting all kinds of data, water, gas, electricity, district heat, but also outside temperatures, anything that can help understanding the data, not only like supplying data or finding data or tracing data, but also try to explain the data. We do this for two kinds of customers. One is the real estate company, and the other focus is on the users, I mean the occupiers of the buildings. We do this all over Europe, and that's basically what we do.
Good to hear. Then you are definitely set up as a critical expert on this topic. To set the stage, we can first ask the question, what do we actually mean by credible data in the real assets industry? And why is completeness just as critical as accuracy?
Well, completeness and quality, which means data quality and data quantity, are, so to say, bad partners. I mean, the one will not go without the other. You can have a good quality, but if it's not complete, well, there you are. We call it the time series recording. If we miss like 2 days of data, all the rest can be as good as it can be, but you will have to extrapolate, manipulate the data. So credible data is the data that is complete and fully validated, which is a hassle. I mean, it's not easy. And then you only have the data, which means you don't know what the purpose is. That's another thing. You need also the full data context to have a full credible part, which means then you will have data that is actionable, which is important because you need to do something with it. Okay, having the data is not enough.
Yeah, and the importance is obviously having that data, but the ability to understand that data and make those decisions from that.
Exactly. Data is not only the data point, it comes with a location, it comes with the technical context, it comes with the business context. This data point can be part of a cost center for the customer. So the context is really important.
And within that context, and looking at the organizations you work with, the real estate managers particularly that you work with, what are the common challenges that those companies face when collecting and validating utility data?
Well, this might sound a bit silly, but the first point is to make sure that you have the right meter. That's number one, because it's not because someone points you at the main meter that it is the main meter. You have to check it on invoices, on meter numbers, where it is located. Is it a main meter, a grid meter, a sub-meter? What's the purpose? So before you do any measurement or any monitoring, the first step in your traceability, is it the right meter? And is the conversion factor of that meter known? Did you check it? And that's where the traceability starts. So that's the first challenge.
Yeah, understood. The crucial start is obviously having metering at a point that is accessible and understandable.
Exactly. And it's also more and more the case that the grid providers have already a sensor on a meter, which means that it is not accessible anymore. Then you have two possibilities. Or you ask the grid provider for an API or for the data, where you lose a bit of the traceability, or you make sure that you can read the meter by a second output or even by putting an optical sensor that reads the meter index. And that is so important also for your CSRD reporting, to make sure that you have the full traceability from the meter itself to the final data point. So the importance of a meter is, first of all, your ESG reporting. A second importance is you want to invoice one of your tenants, or you have a multi-tenant asset. So you need at that point to make sure that the meter is trustworthy. So knowing what is the meter, what it is for, what's the business context of this meter comes in the first place.
And you made reference to the reporting of that data. So looking at things in maybe a bit more of the GRESB context, incomplete or that unreliable utility data, how does that cost participants in GRESB scoring and peer comparability?
Okay, now you make a very big step, Aidan. The big step is we now found the right meter and you're now reporting. So the first thing is to make sure that the other challenges are in place, which means that this meter needs to communicate the full traceability over the data center, or making sure that the data is correctly validated, anomaly detection has been done, etc. So this is also a very important part before you can start reporting. Now, to answer your question about gaps or inconsistencies in data, first of all, is if these first steps are done correctly and your traceability is there, and you have enough redundant data, which is an important part, okay? There's lots of grid providers that provide you with the data. There is invoicing, there is meter readings, for example. There's a lot of ways to check if the data that comes in is correct, yes or no. That's the data validation and the data enrichment. If incomplete data comes into GRESB, well, and it's not only GRESB, it's also the known ESG platforms. If they don't know the origin, your problem is the dependency on input data. It is not real time. There is a limited granularity. It comes from different sources, and you have a compliance problem, which means that your customer automatically has a compliance problem. It's a dilemma, honestly, because you can do all your best to do reporting, but if the data that comes in is incomplete, you know that lots of your data supply has been treated already. There's been extrapolations, there's been changes in the data before it comes to you. It is sometimes untraceable what has been done to the data, and that's why this data should be auditable. We're doing anything possible to have auditable data so that an external company like a Deloitte or KPMG or whoever can audit the data and make sure that the data that comes into your platform or any other platform, be it for analysis, be it for ESG reporting, be it for any stakeholder that needs the data, that the data is as complete and as trustworthy as possible.
I mean, that's an important step before reporting to GRESB and any other systems. GRESB relies a lot on third-party assurance and verification of that data. It's weighted a lot more when it comes to scoring your data. But as you said, we do not know the starting point of this data. We do not know the accuracy that is reported to us unless it is assured and verified. And if it isn't, then comparability gets skewed against other peers. So yeah, that assurance piece, that in-between piece between reporting and collection is major for us and for mandatory reporting solutions as well.
That's also why I was talking about the enrichment of the data. Lots of companies are now phasing out gas, okay, as a combustible, and they change to other ways, like, for example, heat pumps, okay? If your data comes in and all of a sudden gas stops and you don't have the information about the swap to heat pumps, is what I call enrichment of the data. Well, you will probably ask, what happened? Do you have a gap in the data because gas falls out? So you need all this extra data, this enrichment, to make sure that the full context of the data is understandable and actionable. So that's why we don't only collect the consumptions, but we have the outside weather conditions. Why do we explain that there's more gas or less gas? Well, outside it's colder or warmer, what we call the metadata, the enrichment of the data, but also a change in tenants, a change in purpose of the building, etc. All this enrichment or all this metadata is important.
And so as the journey goes on for improved enrichment and better completeness and more real-time data, how does operational value increase for sustainability teams and asset managers as that progresses?
Absolutely. Very good point, because they need this for predictable maintenance, for example. If I say actionable data, it's not only that you are happy to have truth and correct data, but this single source of truth data, so to say, this platform with all of the data is of huge importance for the local facility managers, technical engineers, because they can trust the data, they can see what energy efficiency they can bring to their daily operations. It's good for them to have a very granular overview so that they can parameter their BMS systems upon data that is really trustworthy.
Yeah, and I think that I've seen similar things in particularly Europe at GRESB. I mean, at a certain point where at least 75% data coverage was reported to GRESB. And we've deemed that a substantial and relevant level to now kick on the standard to really give more weight to the performance of those assets and how are we using that data to make those improvements in terms of energy or water efficiency. So that aligns a lot with what we're seeing on the ground. But how do you see this currently evolving at the moment? Is the industry evolving quickly from simply collecting data to actually ensuring that it's credible and useful?
Absolutely. For now, people are happy. We have the data. We talk about 75%, which is already, if you take the industry average, huge. Okay. 75% coverage is huge. The customers that we service, we try to have 90 to 95%. There will always be a part of the buildings that is in construction, etc., which is fair. But if you only have 80, 85% is perfect. But then you have the data. It will evolve to first question, is this trustable data? Is the data correct? Because if we want to decide upon this data, and AI is coming everywhere, through doors and windows, AI is coming and AI will decide upon data. If your next HVAC system needs to be put in winter mode or whatever. So this data will be crucial. And first question, we have the data. Nice. It is complete. Can we trust the data? And the next step is, can we count on it for automation? Can we count on this data to automate my building or to automate operational decisions?
Understood. And then looking a bit more directly at how we retrieve this data, we're looking at direct metering versus invoice or estimate-based utility data. How significant is the distinction between those two when it comes to credibility?
In my opinion, it varies because the traceability is important. So we, first of all, for the grid meters, so you have your solar panels, you will have your battery in place, you have your EVs, which are also important in your GRESB reporting. So all these, what we call the main consumptions, you want them directly and not over invoices. In your invoice, sometimes the grid providers use average predictions and stuff like that. So if you want clear, neat and correct data, make sure that you have directly the data on these meters, the grid meters. Then your invoices are very important because it's considered correct and it's a single source of truth because it's your invoice. So we need this as redundant data, and that's important. Also, BMS systems, you have your solar platforms data, you have anything you can find as a data source, please send it. Your historical data is so important. Give all your historical data, even if it's a flat Excel file, I don't care, but give the data so that we can start the data that we measure now with history so that we can predict future developments.
And you mentioned a few techniques that companies can use, but if you were to summarize in maybe one or two suggestions for organizations that are maybe struggling with data collection, what are some quick wins that they can implement to improve that?
First, have an inventory of the meters. That sounds very logical, but it is not always very logical. If you have your meter inventory, what meters exist and how to classify these meters. Are these meters grid meters? Are they important for my accountant, for my finance department? They may not be grid meters, but be important for invoicing your tenants. And then all the meters that you need eventually for BREEAM, for reporting sustainability, like CO2, air quality, whatever. These are, so to say, less important, but they're still important for your reporting. But the first ones, if you ask me for the quick wins, go for your grid connections and your buffer and production on site. So what do you have already available and what is trustworthy already and where are the gaps?
Yeah, very interesting. It's great to hear that a lot of organizations can take very small steps just to get them started.
But if you start, don't start writing your meter index on the back of an envelope. Future-proof. Make sure that you have your hardware in place, that you start with the most important meters first. Even if you have a small budget, start and think about the data layer. Think about your grid provider is not interested in data, he's interested in your consumption because he wants to invoice it. Your building management system is not interested in data except for controlling your building, your comfort. That's what they are for. Think about the data layer. And in the future, you will need your sub-metering. So in any case, you will need a data vendor, a data partner in the future. Your grid provider will not provide you with your outside temperature and degree days. And your BMS system will not integrate your historical data also. So this data layer is important. But if you have a small start in a professional, state-of-the-art way.
Well, thank you, Joost. I think we've about run out of time for today's episode. But thank you very much for joining me. It's been very interesting to get your insights and expertise on the topic, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
A pleasure. And it's always a pleasure to talk about utilities and about consumption for me.
Thank you for everyone listening. I've been your host, Aidan Versfeld, and see you next time on The Pulse.